Welcome to the debate. When we watch a satellite launch, all the cheering, the applause, that profound relief, it all happens the moment the payload clears the atmosphere and achieves orbit.
Right. The deployment is deemed successful. The champagne pops, the mission control room celebrates, and the system is finally live.
But the reality is, hitting orbit is really just the beginning. The actual challenge is surviving the next 10 years up there.
Yeah, navigating orbital debris.
Exactly. Handling massive solar flares, adjusting to shifting trajectories. If that satellite wasn't structurally designed to adapt to the hostile, unpredictable environment of space, the launch wasn't a success at all. It was just the start of a very expensive, slow-motion failure.
That is an incredibly apt way to look at modern enterprise systems. The go live launch is heavily celebrated, but the environment it operates within post launch is relentlessly unforgiving.
It really is. So today we are looking at the reality that an SAP implementation's go live is exactly that, merely the starting line. As global regulatory requirements rapidly shift toward real-time continuous transaction controls, or CTC, organizations find themselves at a really critical juncture.
Mm-hmm.
They have to decide how to design their ERP systems to survive the next decade of relentless, unavoidable change. So, the central question we are exploring today is this. What is the primary determinant of a future-ready, post-go-live SAP environment?
Right. Is it the technical architecture or the human element?
Exactly. Is it the structural decoupling of compliance logic from the SAP core? Or is it the human operating model, meaning the evolved expertise of FICO consultants and cross-functional data governance?
It is a profound tension in the industry right now, and one that trips up even the most well-funded IT departments.
For sure. So, I will be arguing that technical architecture is destiny, specifically that an externalized, decoupled framework is the absolute only way to prevent compounding technical debt when you're facing relentless global regulatory changes.
And I will argue that structural abstraction is practically useless without an evolved operating model. It is the upstream data governance and the modernized skill set of the SAP FICO consultant that ultimately determines your compliance survival.
All right, let me lay out the structural reality here to begin. We have to face facts. The regulatory world simply does not stand still. We are seeing active mandates change continuously across the globe.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at Italy's Fattura PA schema for e-invoicing. It's been updated multiple times since its introduction just to capture more precise tax data.
Right. And Poland's KSEF mandate has gone through various technical revisions and, timeline shifts before even fully launching.
Exactly. And Saudi Arabia's Zatka Authority introduced entirely new, highly complex requirements for their Phase 2 clearance model. Requirements that were not even on the radar for companies building out Phase 1.
Yeah, that caught a lot of people off guard.
Right. So in a traditional ERP-centric architecture, every single one of those external shocks triggers an internal avalanche.
Hold on. Let's clarify that. You mean the difference between a country suddenly changing a VAT percentage versus, say, rolling out a whole new XML e-invoicing mandate?
Actually, I mean both. Whether it's a minor rate change or a massive new mandate, in a traditional embedded setup, it requires an SAP change request.
Right.
It requires ABAP modifications, meaning your developers are literally writing or rewriting proprietary SAP code inside your core system.
Which is never quick.
Never. It forces rigorous testing, regression analysis, transport to production, and strictly managed deployment windows that can literally take months. By externalizing that specific tax logic into a configurable platform and relying exclusively on standard APIs, organizations save millions in maintenance and years of lead time. Architecture must isolate the SAP core from regulatory volatility.
Look, I understand the appeal of that structural purity. It looks beautiful on a whiteboard. But the reality on the ground is far more complex. The regulatory horizon is indeed daunting, but let's be real here. The best technical architecture will not prevent compliance failures if the organizational model for managing it is not functioning.
How so? If the architecture handles the logic seamlessly, the humans just need to monitor the dashboard.
Because CTC mandates require transaction data to be submitted in highly specific, machine-readable formats, and with validated field content at the exact point of posting.
Okay.
The tax authorities want to see a valid business partner VAT number the precise second the invoice is generated. If the SAP FICO consultant hasn't configured the fundamental document structures and mandatory fields correctly from the very start of the project, your beautiful external compliance platform is just receiving unusable data.
I mean, sure, data matters, but
The architecture cannot save you if the data itself is structurally flawed at the point of origin.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on where the friction actually lies when dealing with regulatory volatility. Think about what happens when an existing mandate gets updated, or a new one activates. The compounding economic cost of embedded logic is staggering.
Well, because you have to keep touching the core system every time a government changes its mind.
Exactly. When you rely on an FICO consultant to constantly update detailed tax codes, condition records, and country-specific determination logic inside SAP FI, you're creating an unsustainable maintenance burden.
Okay.
Think of the compliance architecture like an international power grid. The external compliance platform is basically a universal adapter handling the volatile voltage changes of different jurisdictions.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. So if we hardwire every local corporate entity directly to the raw regulatory voltage, meaning we embed that development right inside SAP, the entire system is at risk of blowing a fuse with every single new mandate.
Right.
You have to decouple the logic. The adapter absorbs the shock, so your core appliance, SAP, doesn't fry.
I come at it from a different way. That universal adapter analogy is vivid, but an adapter is entirely useless if the plug itself is fundamentally broken.
What do you mean by a broken plug in this context?
Well, activating a new mandate isn't just flipping a switch on the external platform. It requires defining compliance rules, certainly. But crucially, it requires mapping the relevant SAP document types to a new canonical format.
Right.
That inherently requires the SAP consultant to understand exactly what the external platform requires before the blueprint is even signed off.
But
if the consultant isn't anticipating the specific line item tax classifications or document reference data that the government validation platform needs to receive, the adapter has absolutely nothing to process. The architecture doesn't magically solve the problem. The consultant's foresight and design of the ERP's fundamental document structure does.
But you're putting an impossible burden on the consultant there. I mean, human foresight has limits. You can't ask an FIOC consultant to possess a crystal ball and predict what Saudi Arabia, Poland, or France is going to do 3 years from now.
Not predicting the future, analyzing the horizon.
Still, it's a lot.
A mandate that goes live 2 years after your SAP implementation was often already announced, specified, and in a preparation window when your blueprint was being designed. Building basic regulatory horizon awareness for relevant jurisdictions is not some mystical clairvoyance. It is a professional responsibility.
Okay, but
If the consultant is collaborating with indirect tax specialists and reading the regulatory guidance documents from tax authorities during the blueprint phase, they can prepare the document structures. If they don't, the implementation requires a massive remediation project later, regardless of how cleanly decoupled the architecture is.
Even if they possess that horizon awareness, the structural execution of the change still dictates the cost and speed of the business. I mean, if the logic is decoupled, dealing with a new entity or a geography expansion becomes a simple onboarding activity rather than a massive implementation project.
A simple onboarding activity?
Yes, you configure the organizational data, the new company code, the chart of accounts, and then you just reuse the compliance platform's existing connections to the authorities. The canonical SAP integration layer is extended minimally.
Right.
If you don't decouple, you are forced back into deep SAP configuration and potentially bespoke customizations for every new jurisdiction you enter.
But the integration layer is only as good as the data flowing through it.
Which brings us to the internal pressure organizations face. We've been talking about external regulatory shocks from tax authorities, but the call is also coming from inside the house.
Meaning?
What happens when SAP itself updates its platform? SAP's product roadmap is a massive, often underestimated variable in compliance architecture.
Oh, you're talking about the continuous cloud updates.
Exactly. We're looking at environments like S/4HANA Cloud receiving mandatory quarterly updates, plus the continuous extension of SAP's document and reporting compliance framework.
Technical approaches to get data out of SAP, like writing specific BAPI calls, which are custom programming interfaces, or using legacy IDOC types, or writing bespoke ABAP programs just to extract compliance data, you face massive compatibility risks with every single SAP update.
Because SAP might change how those internal code structures work during a routine quarterly update.
Precisely. Imagine your development team scrambling over a weekend because an S/4HANA Cloud quarterly update suddenly broke the bespoke extraction code for your Spanish tax reporting, and now you can't ship products.
That's a nightmare.
It is. The only true safeguard here is architectural, utilizing SAP's backward-compatible published APIs like the integration suite. That architectural boundary is what insulates the organization from platform evolution risks.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the actual semantic quality of the data flowing through those backward-compatible APIs?
What do you mean?
Standard APIs might transport data faster and safer without breaking during an update, but they absolutely do not fix semantic incoherence.
Semantic incoherence. Walk me through what you mean by that.
Let's talk about AI consumption, because this is where the real trap lies for future-ready systems. Everyone wants to point AI at their SAP financial data to spot anomalies, audit invoices, or optimize cash flow.
Right.
But AI systems require data to be structurally consistent, semantically coherent, and complete.
Of course. Data quality matters for AI. Garbage in, garbage out.
It doesn't just matter, it is the entire foundation. Think about this. If the API is a perfectly insulated pipe, but the FICO consultant lets users populate the same optional field differently across different company codes, what happens?
Give me an example.
Let's say in one entity, the user types a VAT number into a reference field, but in another entity, a different user types a shipping tracking code into that exact same field.
The API just pushes it through because it matches the character limit.
Exactly. The AI system cannot compensate for that. When it tries to reconcile the invoice, it's comparing a tax ID to a FedEx tracking number. Standard APIs just deliver bad data more efficiently to the external platform.
Right, but
Achieving consistency requires the FICO consultant to design global field usage standards, mandatory field configurations, and strict data entry controls from the very beginning. Otherwise, your downstream intelligence capabilities fail completely, regardless of how beautifully insulated your API layer is from SAP platform updates.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because without the standardized API layer, you don't even have a reliable pipeline for that data to reach the intelligence layer in the first place.
But if the data is useless,
Let me finish the thought. If your extraction methods break every quarter because SAP updated S/4HANA Cloud, the semantic coherence of your data is entirely irrelevant because it is trapped in a broken integration. You can't analyze data you can't access.
fair point, but
And here is how decoupling actually solves your data problem. The structural decoupling forces a standard interface, which in turn acts as a forcing function for data standardization.
how does it force it?
When you use a decoupled API, the platform strictly enforces a canonical format. It acts like a digital bouncer at the door.
Okay.
If the FICO consultant hasn't configured the SAP system to output exactly what the API requires, say precisely 15 characters for a VAT number in a specific format, the API rejects it before it even leaves the building. It literally forces your data to be clean. It forces the consultant to build those controls because the architecture simply won't accept anything less.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The API does not force semantic standardization. It only forces structural payload formatting.
There's a difference?
A massive difference. The API absolutely does not care if the user put a shipping reference in a vendor note field, as long as it's a string of characters that fits the payload link. It acts as a bouncer for the dress code, not for the truth of who the person is.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? Only a human operating model driven by an evolved FICO consultant who understands how ERP design decisions affect downstream intelligence can enforce semantic truth. The consultant has to fundamentally change their workshop questions during the blueprinting phase. They can't just ask, what does the accounting team need to see for month-end close?
They must also ask, what does the government validation platform need to receive, and how must this be structured for AI consumption? That is a human governance requirement, a deliberate design choice, not an API specification.
Well, let's pivot exactly to that human element then, because once this ecosystem is designed and goes live, someone has to keep the lights on.
They do.
If you're listening to this and you've just survived a go-live, you know exactly what happens next. The war room clears out, the consultants leave, the champagne goes flat, and suddenly your internal team is staring at the system. Let's look at the day-to-day reality of the post-go-live operating model. Who is actually running this machinery?
This is where continuous operations monitoring becomes critical. Once you are live and processing transactions in real time, the traditional SAP basis or application support team is simply not equipped for this new reality.
Well, because they are looking at system health, not tax compliance. I mean, think about a traditional SAP basis team. They are looking at server uptime, memory usage, CPU load.
Exactly.
XML tag.
Exactly right. You need continuous visibility into submission statuses, rejection rates, authority response times, and error patterns. More importantly, you need the analytical capability to distinguish between a client-side formatting error and an authority-side platform availability issue.
Oh, yeah.
Did the invoice fail because our data was bad, or did it fail because the government server went down for maintenance?
That's a crucial distinction.
It is, and making that distinction demands a deliberate organizational bridge between the indirect tax team, who understands the regulatory nuance, and the technology team, who understands the architecture. Neither team can do it alone. It requires an evolved professional standard and continuous regulatory monitoring to trigger necessary configuration work with sufficient lead time.
Look, the organizational bridge is a great concept, but let's look at architecture, evolution, governance. I maintain that human governance only functions effectively when the underlying system allows for rapid, configuration-driven adjustments rather than intensive development cycles.
It's about collaboration, not just the underlying code.
But look at the mechanics of resolving an issue. Let's say your sophisticated organizational bridge works perfectly. The indirect tax team spots an anomaly, they understand the regulatory shift perfectly.
Right.
But if you haven't structurally externalized your tax logic, your organizational bridge between tax and IT is just going to be a highly efficient mechanism for generating IT support tickets.
Well, tickets are part of IT service management.
But it's too slow. If the authority connectivity isn't abstracted as a service, the tax team is completely helpless to act on their knowledge. They cannot make rule changes without massive IT involvement, regression testing, and transport delays.
Sure, but
in a future-ready architecture, regulatory updates are made through compliance platform configuration, not through development projects. The compliance team can make rule changes without IT involvement. The operating model is vital, yes, but its effectiveness is fundamentally enabled and strictly constrained by the initial blueprint decisions regarding where the logic lives.
But who makes those initial blueprint decisions?
The architect.
The FICO consultant, that is exactly my point. You are arguing for this pristine architecture, but someone has to build it. The consultant, who was excellent 5 years ago, the one whose only concern was designing charts of accounts and managing month-end close procedures, has to evolve. They have to bring compliance architecture awareness into the blueprint phase.
So you're saying the success of the architecture depends entirely on the person configuring it?
Absolutely. If they do not ensure the SAP configuration is designed to provide what the compliance platform requires before blueprint sign-off, the integration will require rework. The governance model fails post-go-live not just because of bad architecture, but because the architecting humans lack the broader operational context during the build. An ICO consultant who understands this isn't just a specialist. They are a, quote, better generalist. They have to understand the intersection of tax, data governance, and API architecture.
We are observing two necessary halves of a functional whole, but the hierarchy of dependency is really what we are debating here. If you mandate the externalized architecture correctly, where no country-specific logic lives in the SAP core, where integration uses standard APIs, and where authority connectivity is abstracted, you create an environment where the evolved FICO consultant actually has the leverage to do their job.
Okay.
Without the architecture, their deep knowledge is trapped behind an endless backlog of ABAP modifications and IT approval gates.
And without the consultant's deep knowledge of data governance and document structure, The pristine architecture is just efficiently transmitting garbage data to government authorities, resulting in immediate compliance failures. You know, the best pipes in the world don't matter if the water is toxic.
Very true. Well, as we wrap up this discussion, I want to summarize where we stand. From my perspective, future-ready compliance fundamentally relies on structural decoupling. It is about keeping country-specific logic entirely out of the SAP core and relying on external, configuration-managed compliance platforms. That firm architectural boundary is what protects the enterprise from the compounding costs of global regulatory volatility and the risk of internal SAP platform upgrades breaking your data extractions.
And from my perspective, destructural architecture is merely an empty vessel without the modern operating model. A successful implementation requires a professional who pairs deep SAP configuration expertise with regulatory horizon awareness, ensuring that the data is coherent, semantically standardized, and highly accurate at the very point of posting.
We do, however, find profound convergence on one sobering point. An SAP go-live is the last decision the implementation team makes and the very first decision the operations team inherits. Building a compliance architecture that the operations team can actually maintain and extend without needing a massive new implementation project is the most important thing the deployment team does.
Completely. The era of implementing SAP purely for operational function, just getting the accounting right so the books close, is an outdated concept. We are now in an era of implementing for compliance, intelligence, and long-term adaptability. If your go-live strategy doesn't account for what happens on day 2, you haven't succeeded.
Which brings us back to our launch pad. Hitting orbit, achieving go-live, isn't the victory. It is merely the prerequisite for the mission. Whether you view that post-go-live survival through the engineering lens of decoupled systems or the human operational lens of evolved data governance, there's so much more to explore regarding real-time compliance. We leave it to you to weigh the structural versus the operational arguments in your own projects. Until next time,